Greetings, salutations, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate your prompt arrival and your willingness to participate in this brief survey. Let's begin. Just raise your hand if applicable. You are a resident of these islands? Yes, very good. You are a visitor to these islands. Ah, you have been inoculated against whooping cough. Excellent, excellent. I have no wish to be exposed to that again. Now, I do assure you that your information will be kept strictly confidential until such time as it is published in the latest issue of the Hawaiian Almanac and Annual, which is ever devoted to statistics and research and information regarding the progress of Hawaii. I get the feeling that you haven't come here for a survey. No? No, may I ask why it is you have come?
To see you.
To see me? Am I to talk to you? About what?
Yourself.
Myself? Oh, that's nonsense. Now, I'm sure you'd be much more interested in perhaps the genealogies of missionary families, or perhaps in population statistics, yes? I dare say one cannot walk about in this day and age without knowing the number of British females born on the islands in 1839. Now, would that be sufficient? No? No? Oh, a difficult audience, is it? Very well. I am Mr. Thomas George Thrum. Well, but you know me, and I know things. You know, I'm certain we could discuss countless island-centric topics, far more valuable than myself. Yeah? Well, very well, I'll do my best. No. Well, as I said, I am Mr. Thomas Thrum, and I count things. Well, I actually should say that I record and study statistics. I was born in New South Wales, Newcastle to be specific, in 1842. I am one of 5 siblings. My father, Thomas Augustine Thrum, and my mother, Elizabeth Wharton MacPhail, due to favourable financial reports, migrated to these islands in 1852. Now, they were immediately given charge of the local sailors' home, from which they rendered assistance to seafaring, well, gentlemen. And my parents were known immediately for their generosity, of course. And so the kind references to Father and Mother Thrum, you may have heard, were carried by wandering boys into many oceans and climes. Now, in the meantime, I was sent to stay for 1 year with my grandfather, John Thrum, in Tahiti. Now, Grandfather Thrum, he was a wealth of stories. Well, having traveled the length and breadth of the world aboard a ship, you see. But none of his stories struck me, however, like those of his adventures with a man named Cook and a place called the Sandwich Islands. Needless to say, the more I heard of this place, the more eager I was at the prospect of joining my parents here. And when the day finally arrived, I set sail aboard the British topsail schooner Royalist, bound for Honolulu. We made port on the 16th of May, 1853. I was 11 years old. Now, the pilot came on board instantly and acquainted us with the news of smallpox in town, supposedly brought from California 2 months before. But once we were granted our freedom from this quarantine, I began to recognize these infected premises by their yellow flags. Unfortunately, our home at Kapu Ukolo found itself in the midst of the infection. Oh, and the piteous and dismal wailing of the bereaved in the neighborhood. It told a sad story of that steady progress. The town crier, it was a little old man with great lung power, and he would shout information at infants, walk the streets and shout information. "Eh, holo hey," he would cry, "listen!" And then he would pour forth the most grisly announcements. He'd say,
10 dead on 4th Street. 7 dead on Merchant Street.
and so on and so forth. Well, of course, at first, I felt that these loud, emotionless delivery was a bit morbid, but as the epidemic intensified, I realized that his reports were my only reliable source of news. And so I began to take note of the numbers, to record them in my diary, and to add them together as the days passed. Now, when the scourge ended, at the opening of the year 1854, I had recorded 2,845 reported deaths in 6,504 cases. That was my first statistic. However, on a happier note, when the city was clean again, it was time for me to explore this fascinating new world in earnest. 1854. A momentous year for the future of Hawaii. It was the inauguration of large commercial structures, including the first application of steam to a mechanical purpose in Honolulu. However, the streets, they still maintained a touch of the native charm which has always made these islands unique. And it was walking on these streets, listening to the poi and the milk vendors hawk their wares, that I began to develop a fascination with the strange customs of these people. I attended the free school, from which I graduated at 14, and this marked the end of my formal education. However, the city itself was much more conducive to learning than the walls of any classroom. You see, I would visit each shop and business with the idea of understanding what made them tick. Now, most fascinating to me was the Weekly Argus. It was a print shop, and it had an enormous steam-powered press. Well, this is where I first became enamored of the printer's ink, and where I first met the purveyor and manager, a man called Mr. Abraham Fornanda, and he was a writer and a historian. Now, by 1870, I felt that I had acquired enough knowledge of the markets to open my own business. Now, my trade was in stencil plate cutting and as a copyist and calligraphy. And business was satisfactory, so much so that in less than a year I was able to purchase the bookbinding, publishing and stationery business of Messrs. Black and Old. This allowed me to shortly open a branch store on 4th Street, which came to be known simply as Thrum's. We carried a wide array of services and products, and we even stayed ahead of the holiday business. Each December, we were appropriately called Santa Claus Headquarters, and for 30 days at the season bore an Arctic sign which would cool a fellow to look at it. And in addition to the books and the stationery, we maintained a large supply of toys of a durable type or an educative nature. However, being a print shop, one would imagine logically that publication should originate from our presses. But every time we tried to start a newspaper or a magazine, we found it extremely difficult to find a reliable source of local information with which to reference. Consequently, in 1875, I took it upon myself. I sought my own data and I published it in the first issue of the Hawaiian Almanac and Annual. Now, the annual was to be a reliable source of information, both statistical and general, pertaining to the islands. Now, the Hawaiians themselves, with their history and their archaeology, their philology, and their, of course, their generally odd appearance in our eyes, provided me an inexhaustible mine in which to delve. And I wanted to attempt to answer any inquiry one may have about the islands with reference to a population or immigration, health, education, commerce, exports and imports, shipping, taxation, distances by land and by sea, and of course rainfall. Now, I valued my annual more than any of my other firstlings. I valued my annual. Consequently, however, that in my future endeavors, my first aim was always to fill the pages of that year's annual. Now, in 1888, I took a government position, and I served for many years thereafter as the Registrar of Conveyances. Now, this position granted me access to the records of the nation pertaining to property title, which of course, as you know, is an absolute goldmine of facts and figures. I helped to found the Hawaiian Historical Society, for which many of Hawaii's greatest minds wrote scholarly articles, also filled with information for my annual, and I was the business manager of The Friend. And this was a regular publication started by the Reverend Samuel Chenery Damon, and it was so filled with useful information that it later came to be known simply as the Historical Bible of Hawaii. Oh, and of course, the Saturday Press and the Paradise in the Pacific were publications, the magazines that we created at the press, with the object being the collection and dissemination of information. Sadly, however, the power to print has not always been used for the cultural or the intellectual betterment of a people. You see, in the latter days of the 19th century, the presses became a battleground. The nation was in a political upheaval. From the king downward, all the government positions were filled with men who were notoriously corrupt and debauched. None, however, so heinous in their actions as one Mr. Walter Murray Gibson, self-styled voice of the Hawaiians. Now, with the help of Kalakaua, he had attempted to create a Pacific empire, similar in scope and power to the United States. But Gibson was also a newspaperman, you see. He wrote articles in both Hawaiian and English, and in all of his papers, he defended the king's pan-Pacific aspirations while attacking his opponents. Yet in the English Advertiser, he called these detractions merely discourteous criticisms. But in the Elele Poa Kolo, the Hawaiian periodical, he called these detractors traitors and rebels. Well, of course, behavior such as this, it led to a terrible antagonism of races between the Haole and Hawaiian citizens. It was felt for decades to come. Even at the Bureau of Conveyances, these rumblings were felt. Yes, I remember one sad day, I had to dispense with the employment of one Mr. Moses Nakuina. He was a young Hawaiian of celebrated talent. However, my reason for the dismissal was that I felt the government position required a more capable man. His work was rarely satisfactory, and he was almost never able to maintain his office. However, in some months, Mr. Nakuina filed suit. $10,000 damages against me for slander and defamation of character. Now, the suggestion that has been made that there was race prejudice or any other such thing behind my move is absolute bosh. But who is a Hawaiian? Who is a Hawaiian? It was on everyone's lips. It was a bloody nonsense. Are we not all Hawaiians? Huh? Well, I mean the natives are Hawaiians, but there are others as well, by birth or by education or sympathies. Should not all Hawaiians share equally in life and governance? I often wondered what we could have accomplished had there been not so many pushing up with the one hand while pulling down with the other. Nonetheless, when I wasn't involved in this ideological war of words, I spent my best efforts at the pursuit of history. Now, most interesting to me has always been the location and the classifications of Hawaii's heiaus. Now, heiau is a temple. It's a raised platform with a stone structure which is sacred to the gods, where the Hawaiians would practice various rituals and religious services. And these large stone structures, there were very many of them. They were built for many purposes, perhaps for the increase of a population, or for the health of a people, or for peace, or for war. Now a note on the war heiaus. From these war heiaus arose a great number of human sacrifices. Consequently, in the first decade of the 20th century, I visited each and every island, and I scoured the landscape for signs of these temples. Now, in all, I recorded over 500 sites on my map. Several articles, wrote and published in the Annual, led to an unlooked-for interest and a promise, eventually, of steps being taken towards the preservation of the more important of these temples. Now, it was also because of my work with the heiaus that I was granted a position that I felt was a bit above my meager capabilities. You see, I was hired as a staff member at the Bishop Museum, and I was appointed to replace the recently deceased W.D. Alexander as the editor and translator of a collection of Hawaiian folklore. Now, the original author of the text was none other than Abraham Fernanda, the purveyor of the Weekly Argus, the very man who had sparked my interest in publishing all those years ago. during his lifetime, you see, Mr. Fernanda had encouraged the Hawaiians to place the literature to page. Consequently, when he passed away, he left literally thousands of untranslated pages to the museum. You must understand, the Fernanda collection of Hawaiian antiquities and folk tales is simply the largest collection of Hawaiian folklore ever published. Now, in working on the project, I wanted to create a direct line of contact between the reader and the original teller of the tales. And like those original storytellers, I did not place a great deal of emphasis upon grammatical etiquette or upon punctuation. And as such, it has been said that my work contained editorial errors. However, with so much information to sift through, who in the world could possibly be concerned with the placement of a single comma? And in spite of the importance of the project, I did my best to maintain my anonymity. Now, I left the credit for this project with my predecessors, and I referred to myself merely as the compiler. But, you know, during the ensuing decades, I did publish many works. Hawaiian Folk Tales, may have read, published it in 1927. Now, Folk Tales was a collaborative effort between myself and other experts in the field, including Dr. Nathaniel Emerson, as well Mr. Nakuina's wife, Emma Metcalf Beckley Nakuina, who was able to rise above her enmity for me long enough to contribute to the book. Now, more Hawaiian Folk Tales was published in 1927, and I did slave away for the rest of my life at Hawaiian mythology, the analysis of the religious practices, ceremonies, and superstitions of the race. Sadly, however, I passed away in 1932, just weeks before my 90th birthday, and without ever having seen that work published. I did in my life, however, see my annual published, 59 issues, containing 9,200 pages. I'm told that it was published in a similar format until 1974. I received many honors during my life, and though I have always felt that I never deserved them, I nonetheless have always remained eternally grateful. Perhaps the proudest moment of my life came in 1930, when I was granted the honorary title Master of Arts from the University of Hawaii for what they called a large and impressive body of work. I am also told that some enterprising statistician in this day and age attempted to count the number of articles that I either translated or wrote or edited and published, you see. And by that count, I published over 250 articles, with an additional 428 that I simply never signed my name to. But you know, numbers were never my aim in any of the things I did. I merely wanted to record the past, to create a record for researchers in the next generation, and do that at the risk of receiving the unwanted moniker of walking encyclopedia. And I do suppose that I did accomplish something after all. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, and farewell.